Guadalcanal, September 1942. A ridge nobody had named yet. 2 men, 1 machine gun each. Between them and the Japanese regiment coming through the jungle, approximately 300 meters of open ground and the entire fate of Henderson Field. By sunrise, 1,500 Japanese soldiers were dead on that ridge. The 2 men were still there. One of them was Sergeant Mitchell Paige. The other was Sergeant John Basilone. This is the story of what happened on Bloody Ridge on the night of September 12th and 13th, 1942. The night the Japanese came the closest they ever came to retaking Henderson Field, and why they failed. This is No Man's Land. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. New documentaries drop every single week. The Japanese offensive against Henderson Field in September of 1942 was not simply a tactical operation to retake a captured airfield. It was the culmination of a strategic imperative that the Japanese High Command had identified as the most urgent military objective in the Pacific Theater. Henderson Field, captured by the Marines on August 8th, was operational. American aircraft flying from it were attacking Japanese ships attempting to resupply and reinforce their own garrison on the island, and those attacks were succeeding at a rate that Japanese naval planners found unsustainable. Every destroyer that ran the Tokyo Express supply route down the slot-faced American air power operating from the field the Japanese needed to take back. Every reinforcement convoy that approached Guadalcanal did so under the threat of attack from aircraft based at Henderson. The airfield was not simply a tactical asset. It was the mechanism by which American power was being projected across the southern Solomons, and as long as the Marines held it and flew from it, the entire Japanese position in the South Pacific was being progressively eroded. The Japanese commander responsible for retaking the island, Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake of the 17th Army, had assembled what he believed was a force adequate to the task. Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi commanded the assault force designated for the September offensive. Approximately 6,000 men organized in 3 attacking columns intended to converge on Henderson Field simultaneously from multiple directions. The plan was sound in its conception. It required coordinated movement through dense jungle at night, precise timing across 3 separate columns that could not directly communicate with each other, and the assumption that the Marine defensive perimeter around Henderson Field was penetrable at the point Kawaguchi had selected for his primary assault. The ridge that Kawaguchi had chosen for the main attack, a prominent terrain feature south of the airfield that would later be named Bloody Ridge, was, in his assessment, the most tactically viable approach to the field. He was right about the approach. He had not correctly assessed what was waiting there. The terrain feature that became Bloody Ridge was a grass-covered coral ridge running roughly north to south, approximately 1,000 yards long, and rising to a height of about 120 feet above the surrounding jungle. It offered clear fields of fire in most directions and dominated the approaches to Henderson Field from the south. Colonel Merritt Edson, commanding the 1st Marine Raider Battalion, had recognized its importance when he surveyed the perimeter. His battalion had been battered by operations in the Tulagi campaign and subsequent fighting on Guadalcanal, but it was still the most experienced offensive unit on the island, and Edson had convinced General Vandegrift to position it on the ridge as a mobile reserve. The Raider Battalion and a battalion of Marine paratroopers together held the ridge with approximately 800 men when the Japanese offensive began. What Edson had done with those 800 men in the days before the attack is the detail that most accounts of Bloody Ridge underemphasize. He had walked the ridge personally, multiple times in daylight, studying the ground and the approaches the way Pollock had studied the Tanaru sand spit. He had positioned his machine guns not at the obvious points on the ridgeline, but at angles that gave them overlapping fields of fire across the approaches. He had organized his defensive positions in depth with a main line and a secondary line, so that a penetration of the forward position did not produce a collapse of the entire defense. He had pre-registered his mortar concentrations on the ground in front of the ridge. He had established communication lines between every position in the network, and he had told his men, in terms that the after-action accounts describe as characteristically direct, that they were going to stay on that ridge regardless of what came out of the jungle, because Henderson Field was 600 yards behind them, and there was nothing between the ridge and the airfield if the ridge fell. Major General Kawaguchi's plan for the September offensive was built around a straightforward tactical concept that should have worked and would have worked if the conditions for its execution had matched the conditions the planning assumed. 3 columns would converge on Henderson Field from 3 different directions simultaneously, one from the west along the coastal route, one from the east, and the main attack column from the south directly up and over Bloody Ridge. The simultaneous convergence from multiple directions was designed to prevent the American defenders from concentrating their strength against any single threat. If the Marines had to respond to attacks from the west, the east, and the south at the same time, they could not mass their limited forces against Kawaguchi's primary assault column coming up the ridge from the south. The coordination required for this plan to work was precise to a degree that the jungle terrain and the communication capabilities available to Kawaguchi's force made genuinely difficult. His 3 column commanders had to reach their attack positions and begin their assaults within a narrow time window on the night of September 12th and 13th. Movement through the jungle south and east of Henderson Field was slow, exhausting, and consuming of the ammunition and food that the men carrying it would need for the assault itself. The jungle of Guadalcanal was not simply difficult terrain in the way that steep hills or swamps are difficult terrain. It was a specific kind of obstacle that degraded units differently from any training environment the Japanese soldiers had experienced. Navigation was unreliable. Units became separated from each other in darkness that was absolute under a jungle canopy. Men carrying heavy weapons and ammunition over ground that the maps had not accurately represented arrived at their assault positions having consumed physical reserves that the planners had assumed would still be available. The Japanese soldiers, who had been moving through the jungle for days to reach their attack positions, arrived tired, dehydrated, and in many cases separated from the rest of their units. Kawaguchi had planned for a precise, coordinated assault. What he launched was a series of attacks that were coordinated in concept but increasingly ragged in execution as the jungle exacted its price from the men who had to move through it on a timeline that allowed no margin for error and no mechanism for a column commander to report that his men needed more time. The Japanese assault began after midnight on September 13th, 1942. With probing attacks against the forward Marine positions on Bloody Ridge. The initial contacts were not the full assault. They were the leading elements of Kawaguchi's force testing the Marine positions, looking for weaknesses, establishing the shape of the defense. What they found was a Marine defensive line that did not behave the way the Japanese assault commanders expected. The machine gun positions on the ridge fired with a precision and a sustained rate that indicated pre-registered defensive fires rather than reactive fire from a surprised defender. The mortar concentrations fell accurately on the approach routes in front of the ridge in ways that suggested the ground had been pre-plotted rather than estimated under fire. The Marine positions absorbed the initial contact, returned fire effectively, and did not reveal weaknesses that the follow-on assault could exploit. Kawaguchi, receiving reports from his forward commanders, concluded that the probing attacks had been insufficient and committed his main assault force. What followed across the next several hours was a series of concentrated Japanese attacks against the Marine Ridge positions that, at various points through the night, pushed the Marine line back, penetrated the forward defensive positions, and brought Japanese soldiers to within a few hundred meters of Henderson Field. The pressure on the Marine defenders was sustained and severe. Units that had been in combat for weeks, that were operating on reduced rations and insufficient sleep, that had already absorbed casualties in the opening contact, were being asked to hold a ridge against a Japanese regiment that outnumbered them significantly, and that was attacking with the specific ferocity of men who had been told that taking this ridge and this airfield was the objective that would determine the course of the war in the Pacific. Stop and consider what a single machine gun position actually does to an infantry assault moving across open ground. A Marine M1917 water-cooled machine gun firing at its sustained rate could put approximately 450 rounds per minute into a specific beaten zone, the area of ground where the rounds impact. Against an infantry force moving across a cleared ridgeline at night, this rate of fire is not simply dangerous. It is, in military terminology, area denial. It makes movement through the zone physically impossible for anyone who enters it. Now consider that Sergeant Mitchell Paige's position on the southern end of Bloody Ridge was not simply a machine gun position. It was a position that Paige manned alone for a significant portion of the night after every other member of his gun crew had been killed or wounded, moving between 4 machine guns that his crew had positioned and operating them in sequence to maintain the impression of a more heavily manned position than actually existed. The Japanese assault force attacking his sector of the ridge encountered continuous machine gun fire from what appeared to be multiple positions, and the fire was accurate enough and sustained enough that the assault could not cross the ground in front of it. The detail that the after-action accounts emphasize, and that the Medal of Honor citation captures, is not the individual heroism of a man fighting alone, though that is real and extraordinary. It is the institutional effect of one Marine with 4 machine guns and the training to use them effectively, preventing a Japanese regiment from crossing ground that, if it had been crossed, would have reached Henderson Field before dawn. That specific prevention, on that specific piece of ground, on that specific night, is why the Pacific War continued on the terms it continued on, rather than on different terms. 1 man, 4 guns. The difference between the airfield holding and not holding. While Mitchell Paige was holding the southern end of Bloody Ridge, Sergeant John Basilone was commanding his machine gun section on the western flank of the Marine perimeter. The Japanese attack on Basilone's sector began earlier and was sustained throughout the night with a persistence that reduced his section's ammunition to the point where he personally carried ammunition through fire to resupply his own positions, a detail that appears in his Medal of Honor citation and that is more significant tactically than it sounds in ceremonial language. A machine gun position that runs out of ammunition is not a machine gun position. It is a foxhole. The supply of ammunition to a position under sustained attack across ground that the attacking force is actively trying to suppress requires the physical act of moving under fire with heavy loads at moments when remaining stationary is tactically preferable. Basilone made that movement multiple times during the night of September 12th and 13th, and the result was that his machine gun section maintained its rate of fire throughout an engagement that lasted hours. The Western Japanese assault column never reached Henderson Field. The sustained fire from Basilone's positions was the primary reason. What is remarkable about the parallel accounts of Paige and Basilone is not simply that 2 individuals performed extraordinary actions on the same night in the same battle. It is that both of them performed those actions within a specific tactical framework that the Marine Corps had built, a framework that placed machine gun sections at specific points on the ridge, gave them the training and the ammunition and the pre-registered fire data to hold those points, and produced the institutional expectation that the men in those positions would do exactly what they did. The individual heroism was real. The institutional framework that made the individual heroism effective was the reason the ridge held. At dawn on September 13, 1942, Major General Kawaguchi assessed the result of his offensive. His main assault column had reached the Marine forward positions on Bloody Ridge multiple times through the night and had been driven back each time by fire that his commanders described as more sustained and more accurate than the assault force had prepared for. His western column had not penetrated the Marine perimeter in any meaningful way. His eastern column had achieved limited penetration, but could not exploit it without support from the main attack that had not succeeded. Approximately 800 of his soldiers were dead on and around Bloody Ridge and in the approach routes through the jungle. More were wounded and would not survive without medical care that the logistic situation did not permit him to provide. The airfield he had been ordered to take was still in American hands, and even as he was assessing his losses in the gray light of the Guadalcanal morning, he could hear American aircraft engines beginning to turn over on the runway that his attack had been designed to silence. He ordered a withdrawal through the jungle back toward his supply base at the coast. The withdrawal was itself costly, conducted through terrain that the Americans were beginning to exploit with air attacks and artillery fire against a force that was now moving in daylight rather than the cover of jungle night. The Japanese soldiers who made it back were not the assault force that had moved south through the jungle 2 days earlier. They were the survivors of a plan that had required precise coordination across difficult terrain in complete darkness, and had instead produced a series of costly frontal attacks against a prepared Marine defensive position, built and manned with exactly the capability needed to hold it through the night. Colonel Edson's response on the morning of September 13th was not to consolidate the defensive success and wait. He ordered a limited counterattack to clear the Japanese forces that had penetrated the forward positions during the night and to restore the defensive line to the positions it had held before the assault began. The counterattack was conducted by the same raiders and paratroopers who had been fighting through the night. Men who had been awake and in combat for hours and who were now being asked to move forward across ground where Japanese dead lay in the grass and where isolated Japanese survivors were still firing from positions that the night assault had not completely cleared. The counterattack succeeded. It succeeded because the Marine units that conducted it had been designed to conduct exactly this kind of operation: to move to contact, engage whatever was there, and take ground from an opponent who had been fighting for as long as they had, and who had in addition the disadvantage of being on the wrong side of a defensive line that was now being pushed in the opposite direction. What the counterattack revealed was something that every subsequent study of Bloody Ridge has confirmed. The Japanese assault had come very close. Penetrations of the Marine forward line during the night had reached points where individual Marine positions were surrounded and fighting in multiple directions simultaneously, where unit cohesion had broken down to the level of individual Marines making individual decisions about where to fire and where to move without reference to any higher authority than their own assessment of what the situation required. The Marine defensive line had not held because the plan was perfect. It had held because the men in the positions had done what the Marine Corps had trained them to do when plans stopped being relevant and individual judgment became the only thing that stood between the Japanese assault and Henderson Field. The Battle of Bloody Ridge on the night of September 12th and 13th, 1942, was the decisive engagement of the Guadalcanal campaign in a specific and precise sense. It was the last moment at which the Japanese had a realistic opportunity to retake Henderson Field by ground assault with the forces available to them on the island at that time. After Bloody Ridge, the Japanese High Command made two decisions. The first was to commit significantly larger forces to Guadalcanal, 3 full divisions rather than 1 reinforced regiment, in an attempt to overwhelm the Marine garrison through numerical superiority rather than tactical surprise. The second was to continue and intensify the naval campaign to interdict American supply and reinforcement of the island. Both of these decisions led to further Japanese defeats. The Tanaru battle had already shown what happened to Japanese assaults against prepared Marine positions, and Bloody Ridge confirmed and extended that lesson at larger scale. The naval campaign produced the series of surface engagements around Guadalcanal in the months that followed, the battles of Cape Esperance, Santa Cruz, and Guadalcanal, that destroyed Japanese destroyer and cruiser strength at a rate the Imperial Navy could not sustain. The men who held Bloody Ridge had not simply won a battle on a ridge that nobody had named yet. They had changed the terms on which the war in the Pacific would continue. An American loss on September 13th would have given Japan Henderson Field. Henderson Field would have given Japan air dominance over the Southern Solomons, and air dominance over the Southern Solomons would have made the American campaign to take Guadalcanal significantly more costly in lives and significantly longer in time that Japan needed, and that the men on Bloody Ridge did not give them. Mitchell Paige and John Basilone received the Medal of Honor. They were the only 2 enlisted Marines in the entire Second World War to receive the Medal of Honor for actions in the same battle on the same night. The ridge, where 1,500 Japanese soldiers died before sunrise, has a name now. It earned that name between midnight and dawn. 1,500 Japanese soldiers died on Bloody Ridge before sunrise on September 13, 1942. 2 Marine sergeants between them were the primary reason the ridge held. One of them moved between 4 machine guns alone after his entire crew was killed. The other carried ammunition through fire to keep his section firing through the night. The Japanese regiment that came through the jungle to take Henderson Field did not take it. The airfield kept flying. The campaign continued on the terms the Americans needed it to continue on. 2 men received the Medal of Honor. The ridge got a name. If this video meant something to you, hit the like button right now. It is the single best way to push this story to someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you are not already here. Drop a comment telling us where you are watching from and whether anyone in your family served in the Pacific or the Marine Corps. We will see you in the next one.